one of the things that this roundtable has always done is have our own members speak. A lot of our best programs have been members who have the enthusiasm, the passion, and the research capability to look into things that they are really, really interested in. And tonight's an example of that. John Roos is a member of our roundtable, has been for the last couple of years maybe, but he was an intern here at the park, volunteer with the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. He's a graduate of Southern New Hampshire University, bachelor's degree in American history. And he's a member, or not a member, but he gives tours for Fredericksburg Tours. So he has a lot of experience at all 4 of our area battlefields, and I guess Chatham Manor and the Jackson Death Site as well. And I know you also worked at a couple other spots, John. Is it Oxon Hill, right? Oxon Hill?
Yeah, Oxon Hill in Fort Washington in Maryland, just outside of DC.
Right, and you're also out in Glen Canyon.
Yeah, middle nowhere, Utah.
And he now lives in Fredericksburg. He's our webmaster and newsletter editor. And he's married to his wife, Sarah, newly married back in October. Congratulations. And she also has love for this area's history. And he's working toward his master's degree in American history at Southern New Hampshire University, and is a teacher in Virginia. Endorsements in, I'm doing this by memory, but history, civics, geography, and social studies.
Yes.
And we're glad to have him as a member and glad to have him as a speaker. And tonight he's going to tell us or give us his take on Ambrose Burnside. So take it away, John.
No wonder why I have no time for anything. When you actually say it out loud, it's like, wow, I actually have like no time for anything. And my boss, John Canister, keeps me pretty busy. So, all right. So let's kind of really quick, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming on and joining in on this program. Special thank you, as it's been noted, there are a lot of other new faces here. A lot of that is my family and friends that are supporting me. This is my first, we'll go public speaking event. So a little nervous and stuff. So, but thank you everybody for your support. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get this, let's jump into this. All right. And let's start this. Come on. Old laptop. Bear with me. Here we go. And let me close up this. This way I see nothing but my screen. All right. Let's talk a little bit about General Ambrose Burnside and the blame for the loss at the Battle of Fredericksburg. My interest in General Ambrose Burnside goes way back when I would take these road trips with my father and we'd visit all these different battlefields. Fredericksburg was always a staple of where we would stop. And I call it, I became a victim of the rhetoric of Ambrose Burnside. That very one-dimensional feeling of northern end of the battlefield, which we'll get into in a little bit, and just looking at that and saying, this guy's nuts, this guy's a maniac, he is incompetent, he is a buffoon, he wasn't fit for command and things like that. But it was during my internship where my thought about Ambrose Burnside started to change. I realized that maybe this guy is not as history has come to see him. I would give tours during my internship, and people would come onto the tour and be like, I want to hear about this idiot Burnside. Or I even would ask John Hennessy, chief historian of the park here, was this really Burnside's fault? And John gave a very simple answer. Yeah, he's the commanding officer of the Army, so it's definitely his fault. And I really, after John Hennessy said that to me that one time, I realized how black and white people really look at this battle. Very one-dimensional, and these are all phrases I'm going to be using again. And I really thought, you know what? It can't be that one-dimensional. It's simple. Burnside makes it simple because after the Battle of Fredericksburg, he takes the blame for the loss. And at that time, Union generals really don't do that. We know McClellan, John Pope, they like to pass the buck off to somebody else. But Burnside was like, I own it. I did it. This is my fault, which is something to say to the character, but we also need to understand that maybe him just taking the blame is not enough to warrant history saying Burnside was incompetent, Fredericksburg was bad, he never should have done it. The important thing to start with in understanding where we are in the scheme of the war and what are the events that will confound and start piling up and thrust onto Burnside's shoulders as the Fredericksburg campaign comes about. What is basically the situation is by the time Fredericksburg comes about, a lot of things had gone wrong for the Union war effort. 1862 started out with a bang, a lot of victories. George McClellan, who we'll meet a little bit later, the commander of the Union Army of the Potomac, he was basically at the gates of Richmond, poised to take control and possibly end the war. In one battle, the commanding officer of the Confederate forces, his name is Joseph Johnston, is wounded, and Jefferson Davis taps one Robert E. Lee to take command of Confederate forces in Richmond. And in a series of battles called the 7 Days, McClellan is pushed from the gates of Richmond all the way down the peninsula. And the 7 days not only took a toll on the Union Army, but it also took a toll on Washington leadership, especially Abraham Lincoln. Just to read a quote here, on July 22nd, 1862, Lincoln calls in his cabinet to tell him that he has a radical piece of legislature that he plans on announcing, and that is the Emancipation Proclamation. And when the cabinet hears this, their reaction is, don't announce it. It would look like an act of a desperate government, a desperate and an exhausted government. July 22nd, things have again taken a turn. Lincoln knows that the Emancipation Proclamation is going to be something very important for the war effort. His ambivalence on slavery is pretty well known at this time. You know, free some slaves, free all slaves, free no slaves, whatever it takes to preserve the Union. But Lincoln, being a master of walking the political and military tightrope, he knows that freeing the slaves in the states that have seceded will do disaster to the Confederate war effort, their economy, the culture, everything. But the problem is just to announce it with all these battlefield losses that's going on would cause a lot of turmoil in the North, since the war effort is not looking good. And things just get worse. At the end of August of 1862, the Battle of Second Manassas occurs. Arguably, in my opinion, Lee's greatest victory. He absolutely throttles his enemy at Second Manassas. And then things get even worse, because after that, in early September, Robert E. Lee crosses the Potomac River into northern soil in Maryland. Now, what will ensue on September 17th, 1862, the Battle of Antietam, little, follow my cursor, a little painting down here. And this bridge, pick this one specifically because this bridge is called Burnside Bridge. Again, I'm going to use the word arguably a lot. Arguably, that was, Burnside had the most success at Antietam by getting across that bridge, but that's a discussion for another day. The importance of Antietam for Fredericksburg is the outcome. In one day, September 17th, 1862, these two armies will collide, single bloodiest day in American history. 23,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, and captured. For George McClellan, the commander of the Union forces at Antietam, nobody's a bigger cheerleader for McClellan than McClellan. And he calls, you know, rah, rah, great victory, decisive victory. Why? Because the one positive that really comes out of the Battle of Antietam is Robert E. Lee withdraws back into Virginia. For Lincoln, who's hearing McClellan call a decisive victory, he's like, okay, yeah, Lee withdrew, but you could have done a lot better. So for Abraham Lincoln, Antietam is the single greatest moral victory, with quotes. I'm not sure if everybody can see me, so with quotes, moral victory. And Antietam is the answer for Lincoln's problem with the Emancipation Proclamation, because no matter what it was going to be announced, Lincoln wanted a decisive victory, and in a roundabout way, he kind of got it. Had Antietam been more decisive, would Burnside have even been a factor? If Burnside did become commander after a decisive victory, you know, right now I'm playing the what if game, and we're going to kind of leave that alone. That's questions for another time. But what we do know, and I'm going to read another quote, on September 22nd, 1862, In a cabinet meeting, Lincoln said, "The action against the rebels was not quite what I hoped, but they had been driven out of Maryland and Pennsylvania was safe." And on September 23rd, newspapers will publish the Emancipation Proclamation. Basically, shorten it up, all slaves in the states that seceded will be free on January 1st, 1863, which starts putting us into kind of a really tight time frame. But we know from what Lincoln said there about this victory, kind of, that Antietam wasn't what he wanted. He wanted more of that decisive victory. Now, political pressure in the Civil War on the battlefields was nothing new. It started in the beginning. It will go all the way through to the end of Appomattox. But honestly, I feel that this is the most politically charged battle of the war. Politics was as much a general on the battlefield as Burnside or anybody else that was there, because it just loomed heavy. So after the Emancipation Proclamation is announced and published, Lincoln needs to shift focus and now say, okay, we didn't get the decisive victory. I've announced this thing. I still need battlefield victories. So he's going to gamble. 1862 in the beginning of the year had a lot of positives for the Union war effort. They had victories in Tennessee and Mississippi. They had victories in Virginia. Up in McClellan, like I said, was right there. But then fortunes turned, as I mentioned. Robert E. Lee, very aggressive general, caused a lot of havoc everywhere. And not only did Robert E. Lee cross into the North in the fall of 1862, but Braxton Bragg crossed over into Kentucky, which Kentucky was basically neutral ground. Well, stayed loyal to the Union for a while there. It was neutral. So really, the gamble for Lincoln, I feel, is he is going to roll the dice and say, you know what, we did very well in the early part of the year. Robert E. Lee has been pushed back out of Maryland. And then you actually have a battle in Kentucky in October of 1862 called the Battle of Perryville. And trust me, all this is getting to Burnside. The Battle of Antietam in Maryland sparks the Emancipation Proclamation. The battle in Perryville could have been one of the most decisive battles of the war, but it was a Confederate victory on paper, but Braxton Bragg withdrew from Kentucky back into Middle Tennessee. So that's kind of really huge in the fact that Lincoln's seeing positive results. So he's like, okay, we need battlefield victories. The war effort is not going well. I need to see results. And being that it is now going into October, January 1st is only 3 months away. This is a very tight window for his commanders to go ahead and make some sort of results. One other major victory in the beginning of 1862 that I'll touch on a little bit more was a victory along the outer banks of North Carolina, which was led by one Ambrose Burnside. So not only was Lincoln leaving not a lot of wiggle room for his generals that he's going to be pressuring to bring these key victories, but you also have the problem of what's going to happen with Congress. And this is a little diagram or map of the House election of 1862. It's a midterm year. Now, to understand exactly why Lincoln needed to figure out what to do, because he was getting absolutely no results from his biggest army. And the biggest army is the Army of the Potomac. That is the one that operates in the Eastern Theater. And to be specific, the Eastern Theater is basically Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. That's where we get all the big names from. They are the most visible army because they're the closest to the capital. So they get a lot of the journalists with them and things like that. But the problem is that their commanding officer, George McClellan, is moving very slow. Lincoln is the first ever Republican president. George McClellan is the darling of the Democrats. They love the guy. Lincoln, though, needs to get rid of him so bad because McClellan is so slow. So one thing for Lincoln that he's got to do is, if he's going to sack the darling of the Democrats, what is Congress going to look like for me come the new year? Now, in the grand scheme of things, you would look at this and look like the Republicans did well, but in fact, the Republicans lost 30 seats, give or take, in the House. But you also, now it doesn't sound like a lot, But you also have to take into effect that this area here where my cursor is moving, hopefully you can see it, you're missing something right here. You're missing a whole bunch of states that are not in Congress. So I'm not a math major, so it would kind of equate to maybe losing 80 to 90 seats nowadays, give or take. So losing 30 seats was huge. Plus, 2 governorships was lost to the Democrats, New York and New Jersey. So really a lot of things turned. The war was unpopular. Photos from the Battle of Antietam were making people sick. It was the first time photos were being seen, and just everything was just going against Lincoln. So Lincoln's pressure on himself kept building. That pressure is going to be projected out into the battlefield. And the fact that Lincoln is waiting until after the midterm elections, well, nothing's changed. November is the midterm elections. Now you're within 2 months before the first of the year. Time is ticking. So Lincoln's shadow will loom very large over this battle and other battles. And I keep mentioning generals and battles. A lot of time, most of the time up until this point, there were multiple Union armies out there and they would act independently. This is the first time Abraham Lincoln is demanding that these armies move all at once. So not only do you have, as you can see on the bottom, the Burnside Fredericksburg, Virginia campaign, but you also have 3 other armies moving. You have Ulysses S. Grant making his first attempt at taking Vicksburg, Mississippi. That will fail. General William Sherman will move another smaller army to assist Grant's attempt at taking Vicksburg before the first of the year. He will be defeated at the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou. Burnside's Fredericksburg campaign, foreshadowing, will be a loss. William Rosecrans is going to move against Braxton Bragg near Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And for those of us that are well versed in the Civil War, the Battle of Stones River is what it's more popularly known as. That will net a victory. But that victory will come on January 3rd. So when Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, he's got 3 losses under his belt. That's that gamble. Lincoln has to know that if he's going to roll that dice and gamble on campaigns during winter in a very short time frame, that not only could he lose them, but he could also, not only could he win them, but he could also lose them. One quick little comment I want to make, and I kind of like give you all a break from really hammering Lincoln here as somebody that I believe needs a lot more focus when it comes to the Battle of Fredericksburg, is how Burnside really has not had just due. And I kind of put these up real quick. A lot of the times, and I've learned this during my internship, is that Fredericksburg and Burnside, the scholarly work is very limited, and a lot of people base a lot of stuff on things like the Ken Burns Civil War documentary and films like Gods and Generals. And a lot of people will come to the park or even on the tours when I'm doing Fredericksburg tours and talk about those things. And when we give tours, they realize how much was actually not right. And another thing is that the documentaries of Ken Burns, by Ken Burns, and the film Gods and Generals, is when the Fredericksburg story is talked about, it's that one-dimensional, narrow focus where it really shows Burnside in a bad light. It doesn't show the whole dimension of the battle. And there's only really 2 major works. When you take something like Gettysburg that has a bajillion written works on it, and Fredericksburg has 2 major works, one by George Rabel, and for those of us that are around here, we know this guy very well, Frank O'Reilly, Ranger with the Park. So part of what I tried to do when Burnside became the focus of my thesis for my bachelor's is stuff like this really hit me hard, just realizing how much this is something that needs to be investigated further. There is one biography, which is a little dated, by William Marvel, but it's a positive one. So there he is, Ambrose Everett Burnside. Burnside, side Burns, you'll see where that comes from. You can thank him for Elvis. So Ambrose Burnside. Why Ambrose Burnside? If he really wasn't competent in all these other adjectives that we talk about, why was he the commanding officer of this army? I've had people ask me on my tours, he was so bad. Why did Lincoln want him? Well, in order to understand this, you have to understand how and why Lincoln started to notice him. And not only that, but I definitely want to let everybody know, for those that don't know, when November of 1862 comes about, this is the 3rd time Abraham Lincoln is going to turn to Ambrose Burnside to command the army. I'm going to read another quote here. In the aftermath of the Peninsula Campaign, which would be that 7 days that I talked about earlier, around July 26th, 1862, Lincoln had sent word to Burnside that he wanted him to take command.
I'm on Zoom.
Burnside turned it down,
I'm gonna hang up.
citing, "I'm not capable of such a command." Then after Second Manassas, right before the Maryland campaign in that Battle of Antietam, Lincoln again sent word that he wanted Burnside to take command. And again, Burnside said, "I am not capable of such a command. McClellan is the guy." McClellan and Burnside were very good friends. And again, I've been hinting at McClellan, but I think it also is going to show what I'm going to talk about now, that there's a lot of gray area. We talk about black and white when it comes to Burnside, but there's a lot more gray area, and it involves Abraham Lincoln. And the easiest way to look at this is to just look at Burnside's early part of his career and how he came on Lincoln's radar. Manassas, Virginia, the Battle of First Manassas in August of 1861. One of our fellow roundtable members gave a talk on this, so I'm not going to get too in depth. Burnside takes over for General David Hunter, who is wounded, does well. Doesn't do anything as far as creating any type of victory, but does well. And at the request of Lincoln, Burnside was promoted to brigadier general. So first major battle of the war, Burnside is on Lincoln's radar. And then you come to this right here, North Carolina. And again, I hope you can see my cursor. Specifically right here, Elizabeth City, Roanoke Island, and then down here in the left corner, New Bern. 3 major victories. Why was North Carolina so important? Because smuggling by Europeans to get supplies into Confederate lines to help aid the Confederate effort was something that plagued the North. And Burnside commanded an expedition that needed huge logistics. And I'm actually going to read that off right now real quick. Requiring a joint naval and land expedition to take the inlets of coastal North Carolina. Plans called for 12 to 15,000 men, steamers, sailing vessels, barges for transporting the troops, and to move from point to point, threatening the interior of the Confederate lines. This was a huge logistical operation. Going from Washington, D.C. to North Carolina, again, here's my thing, to move inward and work all these areas, again, into the interior, which means that Burnside understood logistics. Burnside understood what it took to create a large campaign. So when Fredericksburg comes about, he's not like he's a rookie at this. Another important thing to know about what Burnside's stature was that this North Carolina expedition was January to March of 1862. What else is going on in February of 1862? Out in Tennessee, Ulysses S. Grant takes Forts Henry and Donelson. These are 2 huge victories at the beginning of the beginning of 1862. Arguably, again, saying arguably, these are the 2 top guys. These 2 guys have brought victories right at the beginning of the year. So there's no reason why Burnside should not be on Lincoln's radar for high command. Very important to understand that Burnside was not some guy that just kind of popped up out of nowhere. But it is also safe to say that in North Carolina, Burnside's faced a much different foe than who he's going to face in Fredericksburg, but it's still a very successful operation. So now we get into Fredericksburg, and we get into the dilemmas of command. The man on the left is a guy I've been hinting at, George Brinton McClellan, current commander of the Union Army of the Potomac. In the middle, Ambrose Burnside, and then this guy right here, Joseph Hooker, will come up in a little bit. So the Battle of Antietam happens, again, September of 1862. Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation is announced. I mentioned earlier, McClellan moves very, very slow. It's actually not until October 26th of 1862 that McClellan is finally in Virginia. For those local, if I mess up the direction, they're actually in Warrenton, Virginia, about 40 miles, give or take. I think it's northwesterly from here. I'm still new to the area. So, but that's where the Union Army is. So over a month goes by after the Battle of Antietam before McClellan even starts moving and gets into Virginia and tries to even remotely get into position to fight another battle against Robert E. Lee. A lot of excuses going back and forth between McClellan and Lincoln. We're not going to get into all that. But it's around Warrenton, Virginia, where, and I'm going to mess up the name, a general by the name of Catharinus Buckingham arrives from Washington carrying 2 envelopes. One is saying to McClellan, you're out. One is saying to Burnside, you're in. Congratulations. But once again, Burnside, I'm not suitable for this command. The man you need is McClellan. There's a difference, though. Burnside is informed. McClellan is out. Lincoln's taking him like a football and punting him out of here. McClellan's out. If you do not take command, Joseph Hooker is going to get command right here, the guy all the way on the right. Burnside and Hooker are oil and water. As I mentioned, Burnside doesn't have any confidence in himself. Hooker, the only guy Hooker thinks can win and beat Robert E. Lee is Hooker. So they don't mesh. This moment right now, could you argue that this is a failure on Burnside? Sort of. I'm going to argue both sides really quick. Burnside takes command of the army, about 130,000 man army. Did he take it despite Hooker? I don't want to serve under this guy. So you know what? I'm just going to take command. Yes, you can blame Burnside for doing that. He knows he's not up for this command, but he's doing it despite Hooker. My argument to that is if Burnside's plans for Fredericksburg were met with nothing but follies on his part, then you would have merit for that argument. But Burnside's plans were solid. And Burnside's plans, for the most part, were executed well. Or at least he hoped they would be executed well as the battle would continue. So I do feel that even though he did it despite Hooker, Burnside was still the right man at that moment. Fredericksburg, Virginia, there it is. Not really in its glory days from its colonial time. A lot of the shipping and everything that had gone on was not as prevalent. The Rappahannock River that you can kind of see flowing right there, about 400 feet wide, kind of silty and stuff. One thing to take notice of are these three, one's all the way over here, one's in the middle, these like stone stanchions. That's where bridges would be. There were no bridges to get into Fredericksburg from the other side of the river where this photo was taken, which meant that there was going to be a huge logistical problem. How do we get across that river if we're going to attack Fredericksburg? Well, in order to understand that, you have to understand where Fredericksburg comes into play. November 7th, 1862, Ambrose Burnside takes command of this army. He inherited, though, a campaign that was already in action. I'm going to talk about a date that gets almost no review, no talk about. Basically, everything kind of starts here when Burnside takes command. I'm going to talk about the day before, November 6th, 1862, and I'm going to read a quote from Burnside's testimony to the Joint Committees on the Conduct of the War. When discussing a course of action with General McClellan, I advised him we should go the route of Fredericksburg. On the 6th of November, with other officers present, McClellan ordered his chief engineer to have all pontoon bridges sent to Washington in anticipation of this route. Pontoons are going to be something that we, again, that live here and go through these fields know very well, but just to kind of describe what pontoons are, you kind of get an idea of in the painting on the left of what it takes to put a pontoon bridge together. Basically, the pontoons are big lumbering boats, and then you put all these other things in it. Do a lot of lashes. It's a scout's dream, a lot of knots. On the right side, you can see that there is, that's a photo from 1863, crossing the Rappahannock River. That's what a pontoon bridge would look like. The painting is actually of, on the left, is of trying to build the pontoons crossing over into Fredericksburg. So there's plans in motion that when McClellan's let go and Burnside takes command. We see on November 6th, McClellan has put in orders. Pontoons need to be put here because we need this stuff across the river from Fredericksburg to get into the city. Now, for those that looking at the river again, it's not that wide. And I just really want to make a quick comment about that. A lot of times the question comes up, couldn't they just go across the river? Sure. We here know that that Rappahannock River, it flooded only a couple of weeks ago. City Dock was closed down. You couldn't even drive your car down there. That river can flood at any given time. It's not the summer or even spring. You're going into the late fall now. Weather is temperamental. It was brought up by Joe Hooker, who does command troops at the battle. Let me cross some men over. Realize they don't have iPhones back then. They're not getting hourly weather updates. They don't know when the weather's going to make a turn. So let's just say Hooker crosses 5,000 men. Weather shows up, floods the river. Those 5,000 men are now separated from the rest of the army. Robert E. Lee shows up, 5,000 men, POWs, no questions asked. It's a risk Burnside won't take. So could it have been crossed in certain spots? Absolutely. But it was a gamble if you did that because of how temperamental the Rappahannock River is. So I just kind of wanted to hint on that a little bit about the crossing the river. From a logistical point of view, again, Burnside inheriting this plan, logistics is nothing new. And I'm actually going to read another quote from Burnside from talking to the committee. On November 9th, my plans were submitted in accordance with General-in-Chief Henry Halleck for the movement, a large supply train, and a pontoon train long enough to cross the Rappahannock twice. That's 3 days. November 6th, McClellan orders pontoons. November 9th, Burnside orders pontoons. Just to kind of give you an idea, I'm going to be referring back to this map a couple of times. I just want to really quickly hint that this took a couple of days because Lincoln was not sold on the Fredericksburg route of campaign. Here is Fredericksburg, the city here. The Union Army would come up this way and be on this side of the river. Robert E. Lee at this moment is out here, off map, nowhere to be found. And so Fredericksburg is basically unguarded. There's a meeting. Burnside has his officers. There's officers that come down from Washington. A lot of talking. Burnside pleads his case. Basically, the reason for really wanting Fredericksburg is there's a railroad, the Orange and Alexandria, that Lincoln thinks would be the way to go about bringing battle. Goes this way. It's not really here on the map. I'm just using it as an example. But it goes away from Washington, stretches Burnside's supply line. Remember, he understands logistics. And Burnside argues there's a railroad here in Fredericksburg called the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad. If we use that as our avenue of approach, it's a shorter logistical line. And from here, Burnside is between Robert E. Lee and Richmond. And I hope you're following my cursor. Richmond is south off this map. From Fredericksburg, Burnside can maneuver any way he wants. So that's why he argues Fredericksburg. And it was actually the chief engineer of railroads, Herman Halp, that gave the thumbs up and was basically the deciding vote. And Lincoln basically said, okay, I approve this plan if it could be pressed fast enough. Lincoln really wanted to say, press fast enough. Burnside's a good friend of McClellan. And so when he's in command, Lincoln is worried, is this guy going to be as slow as McClellan? Well, within 24 hours, Burnside had his army on the move. He was his own man. He was not McClellan. He was going to move this army. Now, to my knowledge, and of course, if anybody knows better, I always welcome new information. To my knowledge, nothing happened. The McClellan orders just didn't disappear. As far as I know, they made it to where they got without any delay, and I'm going to get a little bit more into that in a few minutes. But the McClellan orders from November 6th should have already sparked something going on because nobody said anything about a change of plans with the new commander coming in. That's going to come up in a little bit. All right, so here is our logistical issues that I've been hinting at this whole time. Burnside will have his army start moving out and out of Warrenton, and they will arrive across the river. Remember, I kind of showed you across the river where the Union Army was going to be, and that map will come up again. They'll arrive starting November 17th, 1862. There is not one pontoon supply. Not only is there not one pontoon supply, but there is barely 1,000 Confederates anywhere near Fredericksburg. Burnside did what you call steal the march. His plan worked. He got down there. Robert E. Lee was numb to the fact, and Robert E. Lee now had to start adjusting his plans, and he starts having to move south away from Fredericksburg. He wasn't in Fredericksburg, but he has to go around it, and he's going to go south to an area called the North Anna River because he's figuring that's the best spot I can make a defense against Burnside if Burnside moves against Richmond. Fredericksburg is right there. It was right there for the taking. The moment had come. Everything was ready to go. He had the railroad, he had the rivers, he had the road network. Everything gave him those possibilities. And he was going to be between Lee and Richmond if he can just get across that river before Lee can get too many troops down on the North Anna. But I'm going to quote this guy all the way on the left, Wesley Brainerd. He is an engineer from the 50th New York Engineers. We were isolated, maybe forgotten. We got confirmation McClellan was replaced with Burnside, and we continued to await orders to move. We received orders to move, but the order was dated 7 days ago. 5 days before receiving the letter, we should have been in Washington. So basically, they got it a week late, and 5 days before they even received it, they should have already been in Washington, which was only 60 miles to the north of Fredericksburg. So that's really bad. Another quote from Brainerd from his memoirs. The message with the orders arrived the day McClellan was relieved of duty. Remember, McClellan's relieved on November 7th. His orders arrived to the New York Engineers on November 7th. It is now November 17th, and there's no pontoons in Fredericksburg. The orders were laid aside until the designs of the new commander were made clear. Again, Burnside didn't change anything. He kept it the same. Did Lincoln wanted to, confirm this battle plan? Yes, he did, but nobody was talking to these engineers. And in fact, this guy here, all the way on the right, Major General Daniel Woodbury, he is the commander of the Engineering Corps, and he advised the guy in the middle, who is General Henry Halleck. He is basically Burnside's direct boss. Daniel Woodbury advised Halleck to delay the army moving so the pontoons can move up and get to Fredericksburg first. It seemed to him that Washington did not realize the importance of the pontoons to the campaign. And I think this is really summed up very well by a telegram that the man in the middle, Henry Halleck, sends to Ambrose Burnside on November 23rd. So I'm sorry, all these dates and stuff, but on November 23rd, when everything's basically shot because the pontoon supplies still really aren't there yet, Halleck telegrammed Burnside and asked him, "Are you aware that I telegraphed the engineers back during the meeting on the 12th to move the pontoons? If there was any delay in the pontoons getting to you, it did not come from this office." Really? It's almost like saying, "Hey, I know you got some stuff going on down there, but I just want to let you know it's not my fault. Just want to let you know." A lot of times on my tours, I kind of equate this, especially when I'm doing this with a family and they have children. It's kind of like bickering siblings. He did it. No, he did it. No, he did it. That's how I kind of look at the situation with the pontoons. But what we see is Brainerd knows that the orders were there. Woodbury gave advice. Nobody did anything. And Burnside had to keep moving. Had to keep moving. He had to do something. The problem is he didn't want to do anything. The best option for Burnside come the latter part of November is to disengage, go into winter quarters, and wait for the new year. But the problem is these guys and Abraham Lincoln. Burnside basically gets stuck between a rock and a hard place, or as I like to call, between a Lincoln and a Lee. That's where Burnside is stuck come the latter parts of November, getting into the beginning of December. Lee was moving south, as I told you, trying to get to the North Anna River, about 12-15 miles south of Fredericksburg, to create a defensive position there to stop Burnside. Well, Burnside's not moving when he gets to the other side of Fredericksburg because he can't get across the river. Lee gets word of this and he's like, "Okay, we're going to move up and start moving to Fredericksburg and watch and see what happens. He's not going to come across and try to block us from Richmond. Now we're going to move up and we're going to try to block him from Richmond." Burnside explains to Lincoln about his problems. "I just got the pontoons. The Confederates are starting to arrive on the other side of the river. I got a problem here." Lincoln's basically like, "Well, you got the pontoons now." And Burnside keeps arguing, "If I try to bring a battle now, I'm going to fail." And Lincoln is basically saying to him, "Yeah, if you attack, you might fail. You might fail. If you don't attack, you will fail." Again, the shadow of Lincoln looming very large as almost the commanding general on the battlefield, even though he is not on the field itself. You got to give just due where it is meant to be. There's a great line or a great quote from George Pickett. After Gettysburg, he is asked, so what happened at Gettysburg? What happened with Pickett's charge? And George Pickett said, well, I believe the Yankees had something to do with it. You can almost say the same thing here with everything that went wrong there. Well, you got to kind of say that these three guys right here had a little something to do with it. Robert E. Lee in the middle, commanding officer of the Confederate forces at Fredericksburg, and his two corps commanders flanking him on the left, James Longstreet on the right, Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. So we have quite a situation for Burnside now. As you can tell, everything is bad. I am not going to go through this battle in depth as far as every single action that goes on. This is about Burnside and what happens, but I am going to go through the battle in terms of introducing people, but not get into detail. When the battle plans happen, Burnside is basically now looking at December 10th as his target date. We're going to build these pontoons. We're going to get across this river, and I'm going to attack Robert E. Lee in the last place he would ever expect me to attack, right in front of him. The painting on the upper right is a painting of pontoons attempting to be built. The problem is that Robert E. Lee is not a stupid man, and he's always a man that always wants information. And on December 11th, the battle is going to begin at around 5 in the morning because of this man standing there, William Barksdale. Robert E. Lee ordered a brigade to be placed in town to basically watch, listen, report, delay any actions of the federal troops trying to get across the river. Burnside, knowing the situation with the Barksdale's Mississippians down there in town, he actually calls for building these pontoons during the night. Late night, December 10th into the early morning hours of December 11th. Weather's unseasonably warm, so you're hoping that the fog banks can help and things can work and they can get across that river as quickly as possible. December 11th is a town that can be researched on its own. It's a day of firsts. Fredericksburg is going to be bombarded for 8 hours because as the pontoons are being built, the Mississippians are firing. They're across the way in this painting up here. They're firing at the engineers who are trying to build these bridges. They're shooting at them. 5:15 in the morning, Battle of Fredericksburg starts. Ambrose Burnside orders the entire city leveled. Doesn't work. They do what I like to call the great granddaddy of D-Day. Put troops into boats, which had never been done before. Send them across the river and create a beachhead. Never been done before. Going to do it. Then you have street fighting right here. Great depiction. This house here is actually still standing and had to be remodeled. That's the intersection of Hawk and Caroline Street. Urban combat. Never been done before. A lot of these guys are learning on the fly, and Burnside is saying, okay, do it, do it, do it. The thing is, what Burnside needs is for the city to be cleared in order to enact his full battle plans of getting his army across the river and attacking Robert E. Lee. What William Barksdale does with one brigade on December 11th is, again, another hampering. And this is not blame. Barksdale, stellar general, did his duty. Barksdale was pushed out of the city at around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening, maybe 7 o'clock in the evening. Blanking on me right now. But he basically held that city all day against all these troops coming into town, which meant December 11th was a wash. December 12th, Burnside needs to get his troops across the river. So he's going to spend all day on the 12th getting his army amassed on the other side of the river. And that's when he's going to come up with his battle plan. And here we are back at this map. So we're going to kind of point out a couple of things here. Hopefully you can follow my cursor. There's two things that these two generals know going into the 13th of December, 1862. When Burnside makes his attack, he can only attack two spots, right here and right down here. This is Prospect Hill, and this is Marie's Heights. This is the area that the Battle of Fredericksburg is known for. The reason why those are the only two spots he can attack is because, as you can see, if you look at Robert E. Lee's line, they jut out. They stick out. They're called what you call salients. The one thing that these two men also know is that when Burnside's going to attack, there's only one spot that will give any results, and that's here, Prospect Hill. The northern part of the field is so well defended, and we'll get into that a little bit later, is so well defended. Burnside's very aware, I can't take that. But I know this is vulnerable down here where Stonewall Jackson is. So basically, this is the main attack. I'm going to sum up Burnside's thoughts. This is the main attack where William Franklin, who we're going to be introducing you very soon, is going to make the attack. You're the main attack. Every attack up here is going to be a diversion. Keep these guys busy so they can't help Jackson down here. In the grand scheme of Civil War battle plans, it's actually a pretty solid one, given the situation of how vulnerable the southern end of the battlefield is, where Prospect Hill is. And Burnside definitely knows this because there's about 35 to 40,000 Union troops here in the city. Down here where Franklin is, Franklin has under his command 60,000, double the amount of troops up here in the city. And that's going to be a big factor as we get into the next slide. The southern end of the battlefield. William Franklin is a key figure down here. William Franklin's right here. He is looking at fighting Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson is out here in these trees. This is a piece of property that is preserved by American Battlefield Trust called Slaughter Pen Farm. As you can see, it's a wide open piece of ground. It was a lot bigger. Luckily, American Battlefield Trust was able to preserve a whole bunch of land that we have today and can interpret the battlefield on the southern end. A big thing about the southern end of the field also, when I'm giving tours, a lot of times the visitors say to me, I never realized there was a southern end of the battlefield. They never realized there was another whole thing going on down there. So that's how important this is. The area that Franklin has to cross, as you can see, is a wide open field. Taking the southern end of the field, and I should have pointed this out, I'm sorry, on the map. Taking the southern end of the field is basically, again, think about that southern end where you come in, you cut off Lee at the south, you cut him off from Richmond. You take that, you have options. Lee can't move south. Lee would have to move west into an area called the Wilderness. Lee can't keep defending the stone wall either, because if he has Union troops on his right, that's going to become very vulnerable. So the diversion, that's why the diversion is on that northern end of the battlefield, to keep them there. So Burnside makes this very clear to Franklin. You're the main attack. You're going to attack. You're going to hit Jackson hard. We're going to be a diversion up here. Keep me posted on what's going on. When you take that position, I need to know, because the hope is then we could maybe launch an assault against the northern end of the battlefield. Franklin's nervous about this, though. Why is he nervous? Back to the map. Again, southern end of the battlefield. Here it is, cutting off what I was talking about, cutting off Lee, and Lee would have to move west. He can't go south. This river, again, is wreaking havoc. Right here, Franklin's worried. He's worried about this wide open field. This is Slaughter Pen Farm. He's worried about this wide open field his troops are going to have to cross. And if they get repulsed and the Confederates counterattack, he's going to be up against the river. So he requests two things from Burnside on December 12th. One, I want 2 corps to come down here and protect. In case you're wondering, those that don't know, Army makeup, you have an army made up of a corps, division, brigade, regiment. Make it easier, use the acronym Cloudy Days Bring Rain, Corps, Division, Brigade, Regiment. Franklin, not to get things crazy, is a Grand Division commander, call it a wing of the Army. He wants 2 corps to come down here and protect this area. And he wants to make this attack, just like kind of like with the bridges, across this open field in the dark. You got Confederate artillery here. You got Confederate artillery down here. This would be a killing field. You can do it during the night or in the early morning hours before the sun comes up. It might be something good. All right. And Burnside actually agrees to that. He thinks that, he can do that, except there's one problem, is that as things start to unfold, number one, this I don't have an answer for. Burnside is going to send the official orders to Franklin, and if wanting a before daybreak attack, why the message doesn't get there until 7:30 in the morning on the 13th, that I do not know. So again, I'm always open to learning new things for those that know. But the other thing is 2 corps are not sent down here. Where's my cursor? 2 corps is not sent down here. Only 2 divisions. These 2 guys here. This guy will come up in a little bit, David Bell Birney, and this guy of Gettysburg infamy, Dan Sickles. That's it. That's who Burnside sends down. But even at that, remember, Franklin's got 60,000 men under his command here. Right here is only 34,000 Confederates under Stonewall Jackson. Franklin outnumbers Jackson basically 2-1 on this front. Here's a man that gets almost no talk. No one knows his name. Brigadier General James Hardee. He is probably one of the most key figures with the Battle of Fredericksburg and everything that goes wrong. He's got the orders. He goes from Ambrose Burnside with the orders in his hand and the detailed orders in his head, goes to the southern end of the field, give William Franklin the orders, and when he gets there with the lateness of the orders, Franklin is incensed. He's enraged. He's enraged so much that this brigadier general right here that you're looking at, he goes away. He's like, here you go. Sorry to bother you. And he goes off. So you actually have a moment here where the one man that can answer every question that's about to come up is now gone. When Franklin reads these orders, he actually starts to kind of create a new battle plan in his mind. Could it be his anger? Maybe. Whatever it is, the bottom line is he's going to take Burnside's orders and interpret them his own way. Now, I do want to say that orders in the Civil War kind of being vague is nothing new. Very famously, Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg, take that hill if practical. So you kind of know that vague orders happen. The orders from Burnside is attack with a division at least. Keep it supported. Keep a line of retreat open in case you have to fall back. Have the rest of your forces ready to move down the Richmond Road. It doesn't sound like a huge attack when you really think about it. And Franklin will take those orders and put in his battle orders to the letter of what he's reading. But again, he's going to interpret them his own way. He's like, he actually thinks in his mind, well, something happened at another portion of the battlefield. I must be a diversion now because I'm attacking with just a division. I'm not putting in a major attack. The bottom line here is, A, if Franklin had any questions, he should have spoken up. B, General James Hardee was still down there. And Franklin, all he had to do was just find him and get clarification of the orders. And B and C, there is something on this battlefield that had never been on a battlefield before, the telegraph. Or they may be hesitant to use it, interpreting the messages coming through. Whatever it is, they didn't use it. Franklin did not try to get clarification from his commanding general. And that is key to this whole thing. In total, Franklin has 12 divisions under his command. And again, totaling 60,000 troops. When this battle is all said and done, out of those 60,000, about 50,000 of them are going to be doing nothing. They will never see combat on the 13th. So remember I said Jackson has 34,000. Franklin outnumbers him almost 2-1 with 60,000. And Franklin's basically going to commit anywhere from 10 to 12,000 troops. That's it. That's all he's going to do. Now, I'm back to this map. I wish I had what I call the Burnside map. Part of the reason for the oddness of the orders, it was the end of it. This right here is the Richmond Stage Road, referred to in the orders as Richmond Road. And the Richmond Road in Burnside's map in 1862, this intersection is up here, and then it's up here. Which means that if you're coming out of Fredericksburg and you're Burnside looking at this map, when he's saying move down the Richmond Road, he's thinking that the road goes like that and curves right into Prospect Hill. So yeah, if you're going to attack with just 10,000 troops, that's fine. Once you make pressure, boom, go. The rest of the Grand Division is going to come swinging on in and just cut off Lee's route south. Richmond Road is right here. It does not go south. Call it logistics, call it bad map making, whatever it is. Again, you have something that's out of Burnside's hands. Where is Burnside during all this, by the way? Here's his headquarters here. And right up here is Chatham Manor, where he's going to spend a good amount of time. This is pretty cut and dry. Attack with everything you got. Keep us informed. There's a lot more technical aspects to this battle here. One thing I do want to point out is I'm going to mention this guy coming up. Just kind of keep this in mind because I'm not going to have the map up right here. His name is John Pelham. I'm going to mention him real brief. And the railroad right here, Hamilton's Crossing, will come up in a map in a few moments. One very key thing to know is Burnside's intentions never changed. Franklin interpreted differently. Franklin wrote to a fellow officer after this battle, "I did not give Franklin half of my army to make a demonstration," basically being that diversion that's going on up here, but Franklin thinks now he's the diversion down here. So Burnside never, ever want to do that. Another thing I want to point out real quick on here, this little blob sticking out in the field. We call that the finger of trees here, and that's going to come up as well really quick. Now, again, this talk is not going to guide us through everything that goes on the southern end of the field, but when the fighting starts on December 13th, it's starting very late in the day. But we're going to focus now. Franklin, for all intents and purposes, once he gives the orders for attacking, he's out of the picture. He's basically at his HQ headquarters, doing his thing, having a cigar, having a cup of coffee or brandy or whatever. A general that does not get enough discussion about this battle is this man on the left, General John Reynolds. Largely considered one of the best corps commanders of the Army of the Potomac. I have actually come in my own studies to think that that's not true. He's in infamy in Gettysburg as the highest ranking officer killed at the Battle of Gettysburg. Here, though, in his first command as a corps commander, he's going to fall really short. So that talk can be all on its own. What time does it get started? It gets started basically around 10 a.m. So if we wanted to start before the sun was up, that's gone. 10 a.m. cannon fire starts, and it comes from that little spot from that Major John Pelham. I circled that little spot there for you. John Pelham, with one gun, is going to hold up the entire southern attack for about an hour. He's basically in an obscure spot. They can't find him. He does his job in a weird area and, again, holds up the entire Union Army down there. So after 1 hour, it's 11 a.m. He's going to pull his gun out. An artillery duel is going to ensue. And then finally at really around 11 a.m., 11:30 is when we can actually make our attack. Now, I mentioned the orders, attack with a division at least. So for Franklin, it's like, well, division at least. And remember, he's got 12. Franklin's like, all right, I can attack with one division, but you know what? I'll send in 2 instead. And again, that's basically all he's going to send in. Gibbon, John Gibbon right here, for those of us that know or don't know, the father of the famed Iron Brigade. He is going to attack across that field that you saw the photo of, that wide open field. That's what's preserved his area. He's going to make a lot of gains in that field. He's going to get across the train tracks and push into Confederate lines. He's going to get wounded in the process. But I'm going to focus on the guy all the way on the right. A major general that is so obscure as far as commanders go that there are corps commanders that are below him in rank. He actually outranks corps commanders who have, on paper, a higher command than he does. George Meade is his name, and he's not going to be, after this battle, somebody that is obscure. And within 6 months, he will command this army right before the Battle of Gettysburg and command it all the way through to the end of the war at Appomattox. So here we go. I want to show you this map real quick. Here is that finger of trees I was talking about. When George Meade, and just also say when we say Franklin is going to be attacking with 2 divisions, Meade has the smallest division in the army. So not only did they pick few divisions, they pick the smallest divisions. Good job. Meade is going to cross this field, take heavy fire from cannon over here at what's called Bernard's Cabins, heavy cannon fire from here. But you're going to notice that there is this big gap in Robert E. Lee's line. The red is Robert E. Lee's line. That was a misstep or overlook by Lee and Jackson, who this whole area here was a nasty swamp that they basically figured nobody was going to be able to attack through it. It would be impassable. During the fighting going across this open field out here, these troops from Pennsylvania under George Meade find it by sheer luck. They're looking for cover because they're getting hammered by artillery. They see these trees, so they decide to go through these trees and try to get through that way without being hit by so much cannon fire. And as you can tell from the map, they break through. They find the one brigade who is within the woods, Brigade of South Carolinians, and they annihilate these South Carolinians. The commanding officer of these South Carolinians, you can see his name is Greg, wounded mortally, will pass away later on that evening. Once they blast this 1,200-yard hole in Lee's line at around 12:15, 12:30 in the afternoon, Burnside's won this battle, doesn't even know it. No communication from Franklin at all. One thing I do want to point out before I go to the next slide, because I want to show you real quick how close these guys get, these Pennsylvanians get to Prospect Hill. Because here's your target, Prospect Hill. But keep these guys here, the 19th Georgia, 14th, 7th, and 1st Tennessee, and the 5th Alabama in mind when I show you the next map. They're gone. They're obliterated. They were taken off. Here's Prospect Hill right here, the summit of it. All that's left is the 1st Tennessee and 5th Alabama. Now, this is a later map in the progress of them coming down, but this is the map that shows how close they got. You're seeing here Jackson's counterattack to this hole that was created. But basically, it's just to show you how close these guys got. The breakdown of command. The key figure in this is this guy, David Bell Birney. Remember, he is not part of, he was detached. He was sent down because Franklin wanted that support for the retreat. He is not in the 1st Corps. Reynolds is the 1st Corps commander. Meade commands a division in that corps. Birney is detached from another corps in another part of the field. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. And you can also tell it's poorly set up because when these Pennsylvanians are sending back word, hey, we got a situation here. This is really good. We need help. Get troops up here. It's not another 1st Corps division who is set up to help come, because Abner Doubleday was out there with another 1st Corps division. It's David Bell Birney was the closest division. So the 1st Corps didn't even have their troops deployed properly, and arguably giving you my impression. David Bell Birney being the professional, if you want to call it that, despite hearing how great of a situation we currently have, when these troops come to say, hey, we got a situation here, we can really exploit this. His response, no, I'm not moving. I am under orders to report only to and take orders from the 1st Corps commander, John Reynolds. Things are getting so desperate that even George Meade will ride his horse, Old Baldy, on over to David Bell Birney. He'll start chastising him, yelling. Remember, Meade has high rank. He's pointing to his 2 stars, saying a whole bunch of stuff that I cannot repeat to any of you on this program. And Meade also assumes command or assumes responsibility for what's going to happen. And that's major because Meade's assuming responsibility of the situation. So Birney is like, all right, fine. I'll do it. Just give me a little while to get my troops up and moving. Too little, too late. By the time David Bell Birney is moving, Pennsylvanians are coming back. As you saw from that map, Jackson launches a counterattack, pushes out the Pennsylvanians. Honestly, with the Confederates counterattacking into the open field of Slaughter Pen Farm, by Birney mobilizing, he actually wound up saving all the Union artillery that was in Slaughter Pen Field. So good for you. You did something, but if you move sooner, who knows what might have happened. So the question is, where's Reynolds? Troops were looking for him. Reynolds, yes, we're back to my favorite map. Here is where the 1st Corps is fighting, right here. They're fighting here, your finger of trees, exploit to Prospect Hill. Birney's back here, the only support really that Meade can find, and the man that he has to report to is here, the other side of the river, with these cannon. Reynolds, being an old artilleryman, loved guns. He loved playing with the big guns. He even gets off his horse a couple of times to fire a couple of the big guns. All the meanwhile, his 1st Corps infantry is getting the victory that Burnside had planned. And he's nowhere to be found. So again, I argue, is he really the best there is? It's funny because it's actually a complete switch of Gettysburg 6 months later, when he is actually very hands-on. He's placing troops. He's so far to the front, he gets shot in the back of the head and he's killed instantly on the Gettysburg battlefield on July 1st. I can't help but to wonder, I doubt it, but Fredericksburg was in the back of his mind, knowing that kind of screwed up, but doesn't matter. Meade, he's incensed when all this is over and his Pennsylvania troops fall back, basically because, he had it. It was gone. Meade actually corners Reynolds. And he says, by God, Reynolds, what did they expect me to do? To take on the entire Confederate army? So much for that, I guess. At 2:30 p.m., the southern end of the field ends. Everything down at the southern end of the field, the most important position on the battlefield, is over. One attack, very minimal amount of troops, done. Basically, if you want to count from when Pelham starts, 10 a.m. to 2:30, that's it. Up here, the northern end of the battlefield, that is going to be 7 attacks. That is basically going to go from 11 a.m. into the evening, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. Why? Why do these attacks continue there? Is Burnside just throwing troops against that stone wall? Was he hoping to net some sort of result from Franklin as the day went on? Well, the key to that really is in looking at the dynamic of the northern end of the field. And just to really quick give you an idea of how impregnable this spot is, James Longstreet is the commanding officer up here. Right here is what's called Marie's Heights. Very high ground that overlooks the town. So Longstreet has artillery up there. He can cover the field. Down here is a sunken road and a stone wall where troops from Georgia are. Perfect field of fire. Up here, the flanks are the ends. Longstreet has it anchored on water here, and there's a swamp down here called Hazel Run. So water, basically created a funnel out of the town for the Union troops. World War II commanders would call this position a kill box. He boxed Burnside in. The troops can only come from one spot. Longstreet knew where it was. But Burnside wasn't numb to that either. He knew that. That's why it's a diversion. So in order to understand the northern end of the field, we're going to look at the northern end of the field. This is a great photo of the northern end of the field, and I'm going to, again, go through these attacks very quickly because this is not a referendum of the entire battle and what happens. And for the most part, the commanding officers here do their duty. They actually do their jobs. Northern end of the field actually goes off pretty much, if we want to call it well, it does go off well with the command structure, again, in my opinion. So when you really take it down, time is key. On my tours, I like to timestamp stuff when I'm talking about the southern end of the field because then I equate to what's going on the northern end of the field. And remember, this was a diversion. Everybody knew that, except Franklin, who changed everything in his mind. Keep Longstreet busy so Franklin can do his thing. That's what this all comes down to. So everything that happens up here, time-wise, is going to equate with what's going on down there. Everything, and I sound like I'm repeating myself, what I'm trying to get across is everything that Burnside does and commands for the northern end of the field and what his commanders relay to the commanders below them is going to try to support the southern end. Everything comes back to the southern end of the battlefield. Oh, I'm sorry, I went too fast with that one. So let me just, we'll just go through this. I don't really like this painting, but I am going to talk about it in one sec. At 10 a.m., Burnside can hear the artillery on the southern end of the field. So to him, that was the opening of the engagement down there, albeit very late. And what he actually heard was Pelham doing his thing. And again, diversion. So when these attacks happen, 7 attacks, they're going to go in a piecemeal. We're not going to send 35, 40,000 men at once. We're going to go piecemeal, hoping that we get results from Franklin, and then we can have that big thrust of troops. I would hope that in Burnside's mind, he's thinking it may be an attack or two against the stone wall, but that's something that I don't know. Again, if somebody does know what he was hoping for with the stone wall, they can tell us. So at 11 a.m., the first attack is going to go off. William French is the division commander. And in 35 minutes, 1 in every 4 soldiers will fall. 1 in every 3 field officers will be down on the ground. Casualty rates ranging anywhere from 40% to 60% for the troops, annihilated off the battlefield. Remember, I mentioned there was a big artillery duel at the southern end of the field from 11 a.m. to 12, and that's when the fighting down there is really going to start getting heavy at the southern end of the field when Meade and Gibbon are finally going forward. And around noon, one of the more famous generals of the Northern Army, Winfield Scott Hancock, is going to go in. And his attack has got 3 brigades, but the most famous one being the Irish Brigade. The Irish Brigade goes into that attack with 1,250 soldiers. When they will call muster at the end of the day to see who is left, They have 250 men that come to muster. The Second Corps commander watching these attacks said it was like snow hitting warm ground. The troops were just melting into the ground. At 1 o'clock, General Oliver Otis Howard are going, and in 40 minutes, he suffers 40 to 55% casualties. At 2 o'clock, Samuel Sturgis will go in, sort of. Sturgis is busy making friends with a building because he's absolutely blasted drunk. But he's got 2 brigadier generals that can lead the attack. Well, one, because another one is drunk with him. But the other one, the other brigadier general gives a stirring speech to the men. When you go into this fight, I'll be right there with you. A soldier in this division wrote that after he gave that speech, none of us ever saw him again, so he probably went back to town. So when Sturgis's men go in, his division goes in with colonels going in. No offense if there's any colonels here, great commanders, but there is no brigadier general, there's no general leadership going on there. And when Sturgis attacks is 2 o'clock, so 2:30, the southern end of the field is done. So why are we going to have an attack at 3, at 4, at 5? Why are we going to continue attack? Why is Charles Griffin, Andrew Humphreys, and Rush Hawkins, the next division commanders, going to attack and suffer the same fate as these men? The answer is what's in front of you now, the swale. The swale is this, right where I'm kind of going right here. If I were to tell you what's here, here's Marie's Heights with the cannon, Confederate cannon. Here's your stone wall and sunken road with the Confederate troops in it. This is a swale. It's a slope in ground. You can see, look at Union troops kind of taking cover in this swale. They're taking cover. They don't want to get up and run the gauntlet across open field back to town, which is, if you were to look at this below the picture. Robert E. Lee, and this is not lost on Burnside, Burnside knows he's facing off against one of the most aggressive commanders. If Lee wants to launch a counterattack from the stone wall to the swale, there are thousands of Union troops in there, ripe for the pickings, POWs off the field. So Burnside does order Franklin to continue an attack. Burnside makes to make Franklin continue his attacks at the southern end of the field. Franklin's going to give a whole bunch of excuses, so don't worry about Franklin anymore. But he's going to launch 3 more attacks. Basically, Burnside is buying time to have that sun set, so this way Lee hopefully won't launch a counterattack. Burnside is going to try to save troops stuck on the field with troops, buy time with lives. And it's a funny thing how perception hovers over generals later on as time goes on, because here again, the folks that live in this area, we know the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, and we know the story of the Bloody Angle and the Mule Shoe. Robert E. Lee fed troops into that fight for 22 hours. He was sending troops in to buy time to create his new line. So Robert E. Lee in 1864 buys time with lives. But he's not an imbecile. He's not incompetent. Burnside has had everything go against him, despite the fact of having good plans. So it's really interesting to think. And Lee basically kind of did the same thing at Malvern Hill when you think about it. But, you know, it is what it is. But the bottom line is it's a double-edged sword for Burnside. He needs to buy time for lives. He will buy that time. The sun will set. December 13th will end. The battle will officially end on December 15th. So what were the casualties of this battle? When you look at the southern end of the field, again, what most people miss, it's actually a 1-to-1 almost, about 4,000 for Stonewall Jackson, about 5,000 for William Franklin in terms of casualties, killed, wounded, missing, and captured, about 9,000 casualties. Well, there was probably about 9,000 casualties on the northern end. All right, wow. But what's the difference here? What makes that so glaring? It was 1,000 casualties for the Confederates at the stone wall. And out here in this field, it was 8,000 casualties for the Union troops. So you look at those numbers. You look at the folly, the attacks that just seem to just go on and on and on. Yeah, it looks absolutely terrible for Burnside, unless you think about what happened at the southern end of the field. And that's where Burnside's reputation is lost. Burnside is going to command this army until January. He'll be let go in late January after a thing called the Mud March, which again can be a talk on its own. Second shortest commander of a Union army, only 77 days as a commander of an army. The shortest was John Pope, who got throttled at 2nd Manassas by Robert E. Lee. He was commander for 70 days, so Burnside beat him by a week. Good job, Burn. After the battle, Abraham Lincoln, when he got word of Fredericksburg, he said, if there's a place worse than hell, then I am in it. Regardless of that, regardless of the failures in Mississippi, as I mentioned earlier, Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. He was going to do it anyway. He was going to do it. He rolled the dice, and not only did he lose, he lost bad. The total casualties for the Union Army was over 12,000. Robert E. Lee only lost a little bit over 5,000. And I hate to say a little bit over because every casualty counts. That's a man, that's a soldier, that's somebody's son, father, brother, whomever. But just looking at the numbers, when you get it just on paper in your Lincoln and you look at that, it's bad. So, but Lincoln was going to sign it anyway. He wanted to take the gamble. He put the pressure on. Maybe he should have just taken Antietam for what it was worth in the end. So where does this leave Ambrose Everett Burnside in history? It's still argued today. I'm still arguing it. The park has definitely started to argue it. William Franklin, he will, to my knowledge, not be a field commander anymore. He was almost tapped to lead Union troops in the Shenandoah Valley in 1864, but that went to Phil Sheridan. Burnside, he will be back in the Fredericksburg area commanding troops at the Wilderness Spotsylvania Courthouse. There, I cannot defend him. There, he kind of lives up to his reputation, unfortunately. But I really feel that at Fredericksburg, Burnside did a stellar job. Am I trying to pass the buck? Am I trying to pass blame? It could be a little bit like that. But the bottom line is that Burnside has been so black and white, and the gray area has never been talked about enough that Burnside's reputation is just stuck. And it needs further research. It needs further understanding. It needs to be, the story needs to be told. So whether or not you take all these moments from the pontoons to Franklin to Reynolds and you think, Burnside still was the commander, it was his fault, go for it. I just hope that maybe I kind of sparked a little bit of, you know what? Maybe it isn't just black and white. And the end of the presentation there. Just really quick, I want to say before we go to Q&A, and hopefully nobody has any questions. No, I'm kidding. As an intern, I came here in 1862. Listen to me, I'm still stuck in lecture mode. Came here in 2016, and Greg Mertz, told me about this roundtable, and I don't remember who the speaker was at my first ever roundtable in 2016, but I said to myself, I'm going to be a speaker there. It didn't quite happen the way I was hoping with this whole Zoom thing, but I made it. So thank you all for having me tonight. And the floor, I guess, is Mr. Saponara's to see if anybody has questions.
All right.
I got to run to pull a book out. I'll try to do it quick.
Anybody, questions? All right, I got a quick one, John.
Yeah.
Burnside and Hooker, why? Why were they so like oil and water? Something happened before?
It's just more so Hooker's. It's just more so Hooker's reputation. He loves the press, and the press loves him. Of course, he got that moniker fighting Joe Hooker. But he's just the way he is, brash, egotistical. And this again is just my own personal take on it. That he is just the way his personality was. Burnside was just a lot more, even more than McClellan, a lot more calm. Like I'm not this big flashy guy, and he never was throughout the entire war. Even as a senator and governor of Rhode Island, he was never this flashy guy. I visited his grave. It's not a flashy grave, but he just knows that Hooker is just very brash, which I'm going to give Hooker a lot of credit. He does a lot of good for this army during that winter after Fredericksburg. In terms of logistics and getting that army up and ready to go. That's why he is actually quoted as somebody that they thank for the victory at Gettysburg. But yeah, I just look at, to my knowledge, I think it's just a lot of just his personality just doesn't jive, and it's just a lot of conflict. But I don't know of any actual fight or tension specifically that they had. Because Hooker does well at Antietam, gets wounded. Burnside's on the completely opposite end of the field at Antietam as well. So I don't see any conflict there.
Okay. Anyone else?
Dan Augustine, I see you waving your hand still.
Okay. I had heard that Halleck did not like Burnside, and that one of the reasons the pontoons could have been late was because Halleck's dislike for Burnside caused Halleck to not follow up the way he should have on the movement of the pontoons. What do you think about that?
I believe that could be very true. Now, one big thing about Burnside coming into command was Lincoln did please everybody because the Republicans are happy, McClellan's out. The Democrats are happy. They have Burnside, who's a friend of McClellan and is a Democrat himself. So it's actually kind of a double-edged sword in that sense. But I do believe that it's in that Woodbury comment that I made that I show back in that he had advised Halleck to hold up the army, and Halleck didn't hold up the army. And then you look at the telegram on November 23rd that he sends, basically kind of like saying, hey, I know you're busy, but I just want to let you know it wasn't my fault that he's trying to cover up his tracks. So if you really look at it, yeah, it looks like Halleck doesn't like Burnside, but kind of like to go along with John Saponera's question is, again, hopefully somebody knows more in detail than I do. I'm still studying this and trying to get it up, a lot more research into it. But as far as I know, I don't know of any actual writing or somebody quoting saying Halleck said, I don't like Burnside. I don't know of anything that says that. But the evidence in his telegram and what Woodbury said, I think would kind of show there was definitely something with Halleck not supporting Burnside.
All right, thank you.
Scott Walker, uh-oh.
What do you mean?
Hi.
Hi, Mom. No. Second, two questions. John, first,
Yeah.
This was great. Thank you. It was
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
But isn't it great that in the 11,000 block of that road, they've created a monument to General Hardy? They serve hamburgers and, oh, sorry, never mind.
Yeah, good job for him.
Okay. Now, seriously, by this point in the Civil War, Stonewall Jackson had sort of ruined the reputation of several Union generals.
Mm-hmm.
Did the fact that they were facing him affect, do you think, Franklin or Meade, maybe not, but Birney, did they know that they were facing Jackson, the guy that had done these miraculous things?
Yeah, they knew they were facing Jackson. I'm actually going to quote Frank O'Reilly real quick in a lecture he gave, I think at the Army War College. I'm not sure exactly where it was. It's on YouTube if you find it. It was very much aware to Burnside and all the Union commanders that no matter where Burnside attacks, he's got to attack a stone wall, whether it's the northern end of the field or the southern end of the field, they got to attack a stone wall. And I think Franklin more so, his lapse of judgment, we'll call it, came down to the fact that he was just irritated and he didn't get off what he wanted to get off. He didn't get his 2 corps. He wasn't going off in the dark like he wanted. So he was like, you know what? Whatever. Here's the orders. Plus, well, I guess I'm not attacking with a lot of guys. Birney, to my knowledge, Birney rises up in rank, and I really don't know why. Kind of rises up in rank. He's one of Hancock's commanders. Him and Sickles were really good friends. Birney was never one of the greats, I feel, that ever came out of the Civil War. But I definitely would say that the concept of it's Jackson, he's done it kind of like the Robert E. Lee moment in the Wilderness, and when Grant gets ticked off and they're like, Robert E. Lee, he's done it again. And Grant's like, you think he's going to do a double somersault and this and that? It's kind of like Jackson's going to do something. And I'm hesitant here. And again, Birney's not very imaginative, but Meade was aggressive. He wanted it. So, yeah. So I think
Thanks.
Jackson definitely gives some fear.
Thanks.
Yep. I think JD Cribbs did one, and I see Dave Montiff is raising his hand.
Yes. Okay.
Here's JD. Okay.
Two things. The Burnside order for the attack. What time was that attack supposed to begin?
The original attack was supposed to begin somewhere, to my knowledge, around 5 to 5:15, because that's about sunrise. So again, they want to go over the cover of dark. They don't want to be in total dark. But if they can move fast enough across the field, and if you've been here, and of course a lot of us live here, Slaughter Pen Farm is not a large terrain. I think Pickett's Charge is even longer in distance to cross than Slaughter Pen Farm. And so going across, even if it's, we call it dawn going on, you could probably get across real quick, hopefully very fast. So that's the first thing. What time? Of course, you want to go off at that time, they go off at 10 a.m. because of what time.
Yeah, that time of the year, it would have still been dark. It kind of getting close to beginning morning nautical twilight, but it's still going to be dark. Okay.
And always remember also that at this time there is no time zones. There's no daylight savings time, so you always got to kind of. And again, this is a way out of my realm of education. I don't know how to adjust the time for that for December 1862 versus December 2021 when we reach it. I saw it once on a Park Service video when they were doing the 150th anniversary of Spotsylvania. Greg Mertz and then Pete Mogul did it in another video and equated the time, but also we were in daylight savings at that point, so it gets very complicated with the science at that point of trying to figure out what the actual time would have been.
Okay, the second thing, it's getting close to Mr. Walker's bedtime. Please remind him to take his Metamucil.
Scott, you know what to do.
Got time for one more. Is there anybody else?
I'm done.
Dave Montiff, go ahead. I see
Yeah,
you.
I was just wondering if I heard right that Pelham delayed the attack with one cannon.
One cannon. If you ever visit what's called Pelham's Corner today, it doesn't look anything like he was in. There's a 7-Eleven parking lot and a Family Dollar parking lot, but there is a cannon and a little monument and some markers to read what's going on there. His original position, though, he would have had a nice kind of a bush line in front of him, and his gun, he's in charge of the light artillery for Jeb Stuart. He's actually under Jeb Stuart, who I didn't mention at all in this because really Jeb Stuart didn't really do much here. Excuse me. And basically Pelham is also in a sloping ground. Again, it doesn't look anything like today. When he's firing his gun, it's firing once, coming from an area the Union Army figured there was no Confederates, and Pelham kind of keeps moving it around. So it's not like they can center. So when the cannon across the river, the Union cannon where Reynolds is having his field day, they're looking and they're like, where's this coming from? What is going on? And they can't see him. Eventually there were actually some other Confederate cannon came over, joined in, kind of gave up Pelham's position. They want to get in on the fight. And so Pelham, in infamy, Pelham will not see another major battle after this. He will be killed at the Battle of Kelly's Ford on St. Patrick's Day of 1863, basically kind of like early predecessor to Chancellorsville. But yeah, Pelham, one gun for the most part, held up the entire southern end of the attack because he confused them.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I really enjoyed it.
I'm very glad you did. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Mr. Saponara, it's on you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John. That was marvelous. And I want to give one quick plug to another book. Those are the two main books, of course, the classics. But there's one our friend Chris Mikowski and Christopher White wrote called Simply Murder, The Battle of Fredericksburg. It's a little one. It's backwards for the camera. But the Emerging Civil War series, it's short. So anybody's really interested in a quick summary type with a lot of pictures of the battle, doesn't give you a lot of detail, but it really gives you a really good flavor of what you were talking about and how important the southern end of the battlefield was. So
my own little plug with Emerging Civil War is, they are doing a lot with a lot of authors to really start telling new perspectives, stuff like this. Ted Savas is a great guy. Mikowski, most of us probably know him, is top notch in every sense of the word. So yes, please support Emerging Civil War as best as you can. Hopefully I have my first blog coming out on that soon, a referendum of Reynolds being Not exactly the great Corps commander. I'll let you all know when that comes out.
Part of the Emerging Civil War series, Christopher Mikowski and Christopher White and Chris Mikowski, Simply Murder, the Battle of Fredericksburg. Well, thank you all for coming. And that's the kind of example of what you'll be able to see if you join us every month. Next month, we have our friend Stuart Henderson talking about the United States Colored Troops. And one day we'll get back together again and do this in person.
Can't wait. Can't wait.
Not me either. So thank you everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next month.